I just did like the whole first part of this video without turning my mic on. It's almost like I've never done this before. Hi guys, it's April and it's that time of the month. It's the beginning of November, which means all of the cute things behind me on my shelf are gonna have to come down. I'm a little sad about it, but that means we only have a month until the Christmas stuff goes up. So this is my October wrap up. I did do Read-A-Rama at the beginning of the month. We did a weekend readathon in which I read 3 different books. I have a full wrap up of what I read for that. I will link it up above and down below in case you're interested. Those books won't be listed here, but they will be included in my stats. So speaking of stats, with the 3 books that I read for Read-A-Rama, I read an additional 11 books, bringing my monthly total to 14 books altogether. This means my yearly total is now at 178 books. Those 14 books ended up equaling 4,397 pages, bringing the yearly total to 45,894 pages. I was reading about 142 pages a day, which means I spent about 2 days per read. My reading speed was 114 pages an hour, and the total time I spent reading for the month was 51 hours and 30 minutes. Now, I do want to mention, before I get into talking about each of the individual 11 reads that I did for the rest of this month, that I do have a merch shop. It feels really weird plugging it, but I thought I should just kind of throw it out there because I'm wearing one of them right now. I'm very awkward at showing them to you. I ordered this sweatshirt. It is super comfortable. I like it so much. I also have one of the hoodies that I really like. I'm hoping to get a few more in the future. And I'm also hoping to expand the design set. So if you have any suggestions for the designs I should do for some of these items, feel free to let me know down below. But that is all I'm gonna plug for that. I'm now going to jump into the books that I read. The first book I wanna talk about is Soul Thief by Majanka Verstraete. This is a story about a young girl named Riley who, in the middle of an accident, sees another girl stealing a boy's soul. She later learns that the reason that she saw this whole exchange is because she is half angel of death. So throughout this first book in this series, Riley is learning her new powers and what all of that means. I did receive an ARC copy of this book, but that did not sway my opinion on this book. I wanted to enjoy this one, but it had a lot of those very familiar tropes from the early 2000s era where you have this girl who is learning about supernatural elements, who's really liking a boy who is older than he looks, and I couldn't get past a lot of the things and tropes that this book just kind of threw out there, and it didn't really feel like it was its own thing, and maybe it will later in the series, but overall I didn't enjoy it enough to want to continue on. The next book is A Wild Winter Swan by Gregory Maguire. This is a Wild Swan retelling. This is the story of Laura, who is a young girl who finds a boy with a swan's wing and decides to secret him away in her room. And it's also the story of how she's dealing with a lot of things going on in her life. I have this weird relationship with Gregory Maguire's work. I haven't necessarily found one that I truly enjoy. I love the fact that he does retellings, but I just haven't found one that I like, and this is no exception. It wasn't a bad story. It just wasn't a story that was written for me. This story is more of Laura's journey out of childhood. It is a story of magical realism. Laura, I couldn't get into her character at all. She felt way younger than her 15 years, and some of the things that happen, it is what Gregory Maguire does, which is part of the reason why I didn't enjoy Wicked and didn't really get into that story either, as much as I love the musical. So if you do like any of Gregory Maguire's work, you'll probably enjoy this one. It just wasn't for me. Then I picked up The Hollow Places by Kingfisher. This is a sci-fi horror book, which reminded me a little bit of Annihilation. I have a full review over this book as well. I will link it up above and down below, but it is the story of Kara, who is minding her uncle's museum when she discovers a hole in the wall. This hole in the wall ends up leading to a completely different realm of existence, and weird things start to happen. I enjoyed this read. Like I said, it had notes of Annihilation just because of the weird surrealism that's involved. It isn't like Annihilation. It's something completely different. In fact, I think this one will probably be easier for most people to digest compared to Annihilation. But it did have this wonderful sci-fi horror element that just was perfect for this month, that I really liked. And I love this genre. I need to read more of it. I also did a reread of Words of Radiance this month. I have a broken edition of this one. It's part 1 and part 2. This is part of my reread for the Stormlight Archive series, so that when Rhythm of War comes out, I'm ready. I did do a full vlog over my reread of this. I will link it for you. This is the continuation of Rashar and everything that's going on between the Alethi, the Parshman, the Voidbringer, the Knights Radiance, Shard Blades, Shard Plates. I'm just gonna continue to throw words out that probably don't mean anything to you if you haven't read any of this series. And if you haven't read any of this series, I think you should. Next, I read Asylum by Theresa Dale. This is the story of Bailey, who is an urban photographer who goes with a group of other photographers who goes to explore an abandoned mental institute. Now, while they are there, some very odd things start to happen, and Bailey decides that she needs to investigate. I have a full review over this book. As always, I will link it. I will say that this book felt a lot like a lot of other stories that are set in asylums like this. I didn't get into this one as much as I probably could have, mainly because Bailey's interaction with the ghost and everything else going on inside of the asylum just kind of broke that believability for me. Not that, I mean, depending on how you're viewing the story, the believability of a lot of the ghost mythology that is out there. Overall, not a bad story, but it just didn't go the places I wanted it to go, and it wasn't as developed as I wanted it to be. For Shay and my book club book pick for our Tell It Again book club, we decided to read The Shrike and the Shadow by Chantal Gadoury and A.M. Wright. This is a Hansel and Gretel retelling where you have Hans and Greta, who are orphans living on the edge of town. When dark things start to happen in town, they are blamed and pushed out into the woods. I wanted to enjoy this story. This is a new adult Hansel and Gretel retelling, and it goes to some very adult places, and the character of Hans just, the characters weren't developed to match the atmosphere and everything else going on in the story. The settings and things had the potential to be really, really good, really dark and very eerie, but I don't think the characters and how they interacted with the plot, it didn't do much for me. Shay and I had a live show where we discussed this book. If you want some spoiled Phil thoughts on it, go check that out. Otherwise, I'm not going to be continuing on in this one. I also picked up the manga adaptation of Fangirl. This is volume 1. I did a vlog of my read through of this one where I compare the original Fangirl to what is going on here. Overall, it is following a lot of the same plots. There were a few tweaks here and there that didn't hurt it, but it took away some of the elements that I really connected with in the original story. But those of you who enjoy this format, you will probably enjoy this book. This is a story of Kath, who is starting college with her twin sister, Ren. She is a human being who deals with a lot of social anxiety and being away from her father and not being as close to her sister as she is used to. She's learning some things about herself, but Kath is also an avid fanfics writer. She is in college to get a writing degree, and that interplays with everything that goes on with her. I enjoy this read. Part of it is because it takes place in an area I am very familiar with, and the other part is I highly relate with Kath. I just do. I also picked up Haunting in Old Tailem by Janice Tremayne. This is book 3 in Haunting Clarice. I have not read the first 2 books in this series, but I was told that this could be read as a standalone, and yes, it can be, but I feel like you are missing out on a lot of character development when you are thrown into this story. This is Clarice. She is down in Australia in Old Tailem, and she starts to see ghosts of children who are being controlled by an evil entity. The atmosphere and location were wonderfully creepy, and I did enjoy the reveal of everything that was going on. I just feel like I missed out on getting to know these characters better because it is the third in a series. I don't think a lot of connections were further built up to these characters because it was kind of assumed that you knew about them already. You'd already made that connection and you could pull that from the other books. And since I hadn't done that, all of the characters felt a little flatter than they probably would have if I had read the first two books. I then read This Is Not a Ghost Story by Andrea Ports. This is the story of Daffodil, who decides to house sit for a wealthy couple the summer between her high school and college years. She's there to watch over the property as some work is being done. But as she is watching this property, some eerie things seem to be happening inside the home. Now, I do love a good story, a good house haunting that dives into the history of a home because things are starting to happen around any given person. Here, I didn't connect with Daffodil because I struggled with Daffodil as a character because she is dealing with a lot of hard things in her life, but the way she comes off, she brushes a lot of that under the rugs, and there is, I would say, a trigger warning for suicidal thoughts because she mentions a lot of things in passing, but just glosses over them. And while there was a lot of weird, creepy things that happened, the way it was done, the way Daffodil's perspective was set up, it just pulled back from a lot of that. And overall, I just wasn't thrilled with what was done with the story. I will link my full review down below. And then last but not least, for my local book club, we decided to read Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is a story that felt like it was going to have Haunting of Hill House vibes. It is the story of Maggie Holtz, who goes back to the estate that was left to her by her father so that she could discover what happened in the past. In the past, the family had stayed there only for a couple of weeks, and then her father later wrote a story about what happened in the house when they were staying there. Now, this story wasn't necessarily at all what I was expecting. I have a full review if you want to go check that out. It was less about hauntings and more about figuring out what was going on in the past, at least from Maggie's perspective. But I do love the fact that the present that Maggie was in as she was going through and redoing the house was interwoven with the book that her father had written. And that's where the real scares happen. I did really enjoy this read, but for a completely different reason than I expected, and I'm not mad about it. So those are all of the books that I read in October outside of Read-A-Rama. Tell me down below what you read and what your favorite reads were. I will briefly mention that Get Graphic With It is going to be November 15th through the 21st. I'm super excited about getting some graphic novels and manga read during that week. Otherwise, if you want to see more content like this, subscribe down below. Also, I do have a membership program in case you are interested. There's different tiers and you get different things and access to different content. Check it out down below, and I heart your beautiful faces. Bye.